There are places in this world where the boundary between the past and the present is not just thin, it is shattered. These are locations where tragedy has been etched so deeply into the foundation that the stone and timber seem to hold a memory, a recording of pain that replays in an endless, agonizing loop. This is not a campfire tale. This is a forensic examination of a location recognized by historians, paranormal investigators, and terrified witnesses as the most hostile piece of residential architecture in the Southern Hemisphere. Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. Tonight, we turn our gaze toward the desolate plains of New South Wales, Australia, to a town called Junee, and to a Victorian manor that sits upon a hill, like a brooding vulture waiting for the world to die. This is the Monte Cristo Homestead, when what we are about to discuss is based on historical records, coroner's inquests, and the sworn testimonies of those who have lived and died within its walls. We are going to dismantle the legend to find the rotting truth underneath. To understand the darkness of Monte Cristo, you cannot simply look at the ghosts. You must look at the man who built the stage for them. The year was 1885. The colony of New South Wales was in the throes of an economic boom, and Christopher William Crawley was a man who intended to own as much of it as possible. He was wealthy, influential, and by many accounts, a tyrant in a silk waistcoat. He funded the construction of a house that was designed to be a statement of dominance. Perched high on a hill overlooking the township of Junee, the Monte Cristo Homestead was built to ensure that every resident in the valley below would have to look up to see the Crawley family. But high walls cast long shadows. From the moment the foundation was laid, the house seemed to demand a blood tithe. The architecture itself is oppressive. Late Victorian high Mannerist style, characterized by rigid lines, dark hallways, and iron-laced balconies that feel less like ornamental features and more like the bars of a cage. It was in this cage that the Crawley family isolated themselves. And it is here that a sequence of deaths began, a sequence so rapid and violent that it defies statistical probability. Let us examine the first stain on the ledger. It involves the most innocent of victims. In the late 19th century, the Crawleys employed a young nursemaid. The records regarding her name are hazy, lost to the convenient amnesia of the upper class regarding their servants. But the event itself is documented in local lore and substantiated by the layout of the house. The nursemaid was carrying the infant daughter of Christopher and Elizabeth Crawley. She was at the top of the steep, narrow servants' staircase, a treacherous architectural feature designed to keep the help invisible. According to the testimony given at the time, the girl claimed she felt an unseen force, a pair of heavy, invisible hands, shove her violently from behind. She lost her footing. The physics of the fall were brutal. Both the maid and the child tumbled down the wooden steps. The baby, Magdalene, died from the impact. The maid survived the fall but was destroyed by the guilt and the terror of what she claimed had pushed her. Skeptics will tell you this was a tragic accident, a clumsy girl tripping on a long skirt. But for over a century, visitors standing at the top of those stairs have reported a sensation of icy vertigo, a feeling of being physically pushed by hands that aren't there. Paranormal researchers who have set up audio equipment in that stairwell have captured what sounds distinctively like the sharp, breathless cry of an infant, followed by a dull thud. It is a residual haunting, a recording of kinetic energy trapped in the wood, replaying the moment a life was extinguished. But the death of a child was only the beginning. The atmosphere within Monte Cristo during the tenure of Christopher Crawley was one of extreme authoritarianism, and he was the master of the house. And in the 1890s, the master's word was law, and his appetites were often indulged without consequence. This brings us to the balcony. The balcony of Monte Cristo is perhaps its most infamous feature. It wraps around the second floor, offering a panoramic view of the estate. It was here that a young pregnant maid met her end. The historical whisper, the kind that doesn't make it into the polite society pages but is preserved in the oral history of the town, is that the child she carried belonged to Christopher Crawley. As the story goes, her pregnancy had become undeniable. It was a scandal that could not be permitted to tarnish the Crawley name. One evening, she fell from the balcony to the paved courtyard below. The official ruling was suicide. A distraught girl, unable to face the shame, in taking her own life. But the forensic geometry of the fall has always troubled investigators. The railing is high. To jump would require a deliberate, athletic effort. To fall accidentally is nearly impossible. But to be thrown? That fits the profile of the injuries. Witnesses who visit the house today often refuse to walk on that section of the balcony. There is a documented biological reaction that occurs there. A sudden, violent onset of nausea and a metallic taste in the mouth, often associated with extreme adrenaline responses. But the most chilling detail involves the blood. It is said that the blood stain on the steps below the balcony could not be washed away. For years, servants scrubbed the stone with lye and bleach, yet a dark discoloration remained. A chemical anomaly that some suggest is the physical manifestation of a trauma so severe it altered the material of the house itself. We must also talk about the stable boy, Morris. His death was not instantaneous. It was a slow, agonizing torture. Morris was a young man employed to care for the Crawleys' horses. He fell ill, too sick to leave his bed of straw in the stable. The specifics of his illness were likely pneumonia or a severe fever. One afternoon, while the masters were in the main house, the straw bedding caught fire. Perhaps he dropped a lantern, or perhaps, as darker theories suggest, it was not an accident at all. Morris was too weak to move. He burned to death in the straw, his screams echoing up the hill toward the manor. Historical records indicate that no one came to his aid in time. Today, the stable block is considered one of the most active areas of the property. Visitors have reported the distinct, acrid smell of burning hair and rotting flesh that manifests out of nowhere, even on clear, breezy days. It is an olfactory hallucination shared by hundreds of unconnected witnesses over decades. The screams of a boy dying in fire have been picked up on EVP recordings, a jagged, high-pitched frequency that cuts through the ambient noise of the Australian countryside. As we move deeper into the 20th century, the horror of Monte Cristo shifts. Christopher Crawley died in 1910. The cause was a carbuncle on his neck that became septic. Blood poisoning, a fitting end for a man whose house was poisoning everyone inside it. His death left his wife, Elizabeth, as the sole matriarch. If Christopher was the tyrant, and Elizabeth was the jailer. Her grief warped into a terrifying obsession with control. She converted the upstairs box room into a chapel, spending her days and nights reading the Bible, immersed in a severe, punitive form of religion. She barely left the house for the remaining 23 years of her life. It is Elizabeth's energy that is said to dominate the house today. This brings us to the tragedy of Harold Crawley. Harold was the son of Christopher and Elizabeth. In a time when mental health and developmental disabilities were misunderstood and stigmatized, Harold was a problem to be hidden. Following a head injury, some say from a carriage accident, others whisper it was a fall down the stairs. Harold's behavior became erratic and difficult. After Christopher died, Elizabeth's solution was incarceration for nearly 40 years, but Harold was chained. This is not a figure of speech. Heavy iron chains were used to tether him in the caretaker's cottage, and later within the main house. He was treated like a rabid dog, the psychological imprint of a human being kept in captivity, screaming into the darkness, losing his mind in increments, is what many sensitive investigators believe fuels the heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the rear quarters of the estate. The sound of chains dragging across floorboards is one of the most common auditory phenomena reported at Monte Cristo. It is a heavy, metallic clanking, often accompanied by a low, guttural moaning. This is not the wind. This is the echo of a lifetime of suffering. When Elizabeth finally died in 1933, it is said that Harold was found by authorities, still tethered, living in squalor, a man broken by the very woman who gave him life. He died shortly after being moved to a mental asylum, unable to function in a world he had never been allowed to know. After the Crawley line ended, the house stood empty. But it was not silent. It became a place of local legend, a magnet for vandals and thrill-seekers. But Monte Cristo defends itself. In 1961, the caretaker of the property was a man named Jack Simpson. By this time, the house was a derelict shell. Stripped of its furniture, its windows shattered. Jack lived in the small cottage on the grounds. One night, a young man from the town arrived at the property. He had just watched the Alfred Hitchcock film Psycho. Influenced by the movie, and perhaps driven by a darker impulse the property itself amplified, he made his way to the caretaker's cottage. He shot Jack Simpson in the chest. But the murder didn't end there. The killer carved the words, "Die Jack, ha, ha," into the wooden door of the shed. This was a real-world crime, a brutal homicide documented in police reports and court transcripts. The killer was apprehended, but the stain of violence was added to the layers of the house. Jack Simpson's spirit is said to remain on the grounds. Guests have reported seeing a man in drab, period work clothes standing near the cottage, staring with a look of confusion and hostility. He is a sentinel, guarding the property that claimed his life. This brings us to the modern era and the arrival of the Ryan family. In 1963, Reginald and Olive Ryan purchased the Monte Cristo Homestead. They were not looking for ghosts. They were looking for a business opportunity, a restoration project. I think they bought the house for a pittance because no one else in Junee would touch it. The locals knew better. The Ryans moved into the house when it was still without electricity or running water. Their first night was the beginning of a 50-year siege. As they unpacked their belongings by candlelight, they were not alone. Olive Ryan, a pragmatic woman who did not believe in fairy tales, describes the atmosphere as thick. The air was heavy, like walking through water. One of the first phenomena they encountered was the lights. Despite the house being disconnected from the grid, the Ryans and their neighbors would see every window in the house blaze with light in the middle of the night, as if a grand ball were taking place. When Reg Ryan would run up the hill to investigate, the house would be pitch black. This happened repeatedly, and it was as if the house was remembering its glory days, projecting a hologram of the past for the town to see. But the activity soon became personal. Olive Ryan bore the brunt of the haunting. She reports feeling a deep, seething hatred directed specifically at her. She would hear her name whispered in her ear when she was alone in a room. "Olive, get out." The voice was female, imperious, and cold. It is widely believed to be the spirit of Elizabeth Crawley, the matriarch, furious that a stranger, a commoner, was living in her home, rearranging her furniture and disturbing her solitude. The encounters escalated from whispers to physical assaults. Olive described moments where she would be walking down a hallway and would suddenly feel hands gripping her shoulders, attempting to turn her around or push her. On one occasion, the guests at a dinner party witnessed the heavy mahogany dining table lift off the floor. We are not talking about a vibration. We are talking about levitation. The physics required to lift a solid wood Victorian table are immense. There were no wires, no magnets, just the raw, angry energy of the house. The Ryans also reported the phantom cat. This is a peculiar but consistent detail. Visitors often mention seeing a cat rub against their legs or seeing a tail disappear around a corner, but when they look, there is nothing there. The Ryans later discovered the mummified remains of a cat under the floorboards during renovations, likely a foundation sacrifice or an animal that had crawled in to die. But the most terrifying aspect of the Ryan tenure is the effect the house had on their own children. Lawrence Ryan, that who grew up in the house and now maintains it, recalls a childhood filled with terror. He speaks of the boy in the coach house. As a child, Lawrence would see a young boy staring at him from the shadows of the old coach house. He thought it was a friend playing a prank. It wasn't until years later that he connected the apparition to the story of the stable boy, Morris, who burned to death. Lawrence also describes the breathing of the house. He claims that late at night, when the wind dies down and the traffic fades, you can hear the house inhaling and exhaling. It is a rhythmic, biological sound, as if the structure itself is a living organism. This aligns with the stone tape theory, a concept in paranormal research suggesting that minerals in the building materials, silica, limestone, iron, can record emotional events and replay them. Monte Cristo is built of local stone and timber, materials that have soaked up a century of trauma. Let's look at the scientific investigations. Over the years, Monte Cristo has been subjected to rigorous testing. Skeptics have tried to debunk the phenomena as drafts, settling foundations, or infrasound caused by wind blowing through the valley. While some creaks and groans can be explained by the age of the building, the specific intelligent nature of the activity defies simple explanation. For instance, the temperature fluctuations. Researchers using thermal imaging cameras have documented cold spots that move. A room will be a stable 20 degrees Celsius, and then, within seconds, a specific corner will drop to 5 degrees. And this violation of thermodynamics often accompanies the sighting of a figure in period dress. The energy required to drop the ambient temperature that quickly is significant. It suggests something is drawing heat from the air to manifest. Then there is the psychological impact on visitors. Hundreds of people have toured the house since it was open to the public. The consistency of their reports is what gives the haunting its credibility. People who have no prior knowledge of the pregnant Maid story will faint on the balcony. People who do not know about the baby on the stairs will report hearing a crying infant. when you have independent witnesses separated by years and geography reporting the exact same sensory details, you move from the realm of coincidence into the realm of evidence. There is a specific room in the house where people report an overwhelming sadness. It was Mrs. Crawley's room. Women, in particular, often burst into tears upon entering, overcome by a grief that is not their own. This is consistent with the emotional imprint of a woman who spent 23 years in that room, mourning her husband and obsessively reading the Bible, while her son was chained up in the backyard. The walls have absorbed her misery. One of the most disturbing recent accounts comes from a team of paranormal investigators who spent the night in the drawing room. They set up motion detectors and static cameras. Around 3 a.m., the witching hour, often associated with a peak of spiritual activity. The motion detectors in the hallway began to trigger in a sequence. Front door, hallway, stairs, landing. Something walked up the stairs. The cameras recorded nothing visual, but the audio recorders captured a sound that has not been debunked. It was the sound of heavy boots walking on floorboards, followed by the distinct sound of a key turning in a lock. The Ryans confirmed that the sound of the lock was exactly the sound of the old master bedroom lock, a mechanism that hasn't been used in decades. Was it Christopher Crawley returning to his room? Or was it the echo of a nightly ritual performed 100 years ago? We must also consider the boy in the window. There is a photograph, circulated widely in paranormal communities, taken from the exterior of the house. It shows the face of a young boy pressing against the glass of an upper-story window. The house was empty at the time. The face is pale, the eyes dark and hollow, and it bears a striking resemblance to early photographs of one of the Crawley children who died young. Is it a trick of the light? Pareidolia? Or is it proof that the children of Monte Cristo never left? The horror of Monte Cristo is not just in the ghosts. It is in the reality of what happened there. The cruelty of the Crawley era was real. The class divide, the treatment of servants as disposable tools, the imprisonment of the mentally ill. These are historical facts. The haunting is merely the symptom of the disease. The house is a monument to a time when power was absolute and suffering was silent. When you walk through the corridors of Monte Cristo today, you are walking through a crime scene that has never been cleaned up. The furniture is original. The clothes in the wardrobes belong to the family. The Ryans have preserved it as a time capsule. This preservation may be what keeps the spirits tethered. By keeping the house exactly as it was, they have provided a familiar stage for the actors to continue their play. There is a concept in quantum physics that suggests time is not linear, that everything that has ever happened is still happening somewhere. If you subscribe to this theory, then the maid is always falling from the balcony. Morris is always burning in the stable. Harold is always screaming in his chains. And if you stand in the right spot, at the right time, you step into their timeline. The terrifying reality of the Monte Cristo Homestead is that it doesn't matter if you believe in ghosts. The house does not require your belief to exist. It stands on that hill in Junee, and I'm watching the town change while it remains frozen in its own nightmare. The witnesses, the police officers, the skeptics, the tourists, the Ryan family. They all walked in with their own assumptions and walked out with the same conclusion. There is something in that house that does not want to be forgotten. It is a ledger of pain that can never be balanced. The debts of Christopher and Elizabeth Crawley were paid in the blood of their servants and the sanity of their children. But the account remains open. So, the next time you find yourself on a lonely road in New South Wales and you see a Victorian manor silhouetted against the moon, remember the stories. Remember the baby on the stairs. Remember the boy in the fire. And remember that some houses are not just made of bricks and mortar. They are made of memories. And memories, and especially the violent ones, have a way of living long after the thinkers have died. This has been a file from the Nocturnal Ledger. We document the darkness so you don't have to face it alone. But ask yourself this. When you turn off this audio and the silence of your own room settles in, are you sure you are the only one listening?